Michael Carter was a man admired by many but truly known by few. His name carried weight in the corporate world, a CEO who had built an empire from the ground up. Yet, despite his achievements, there was a lingering emptiness that success could never fill. 5 years had passed since he last saw Emily Davis. The woman he once loved had vanished from his life without a trace, leaving behind questions he had stopped trying to answer. Michael buried himself in work, convincing himself that time would erode the pain. It never did. Emily's world, however, was far removed from the glass towers and luxury cars that shaped Michael's days. She lived in a modest apartment, juggling motherhood and career with a quiet resilience. Her daughter, Lily, was the light of her life, a curious, lively child whose smile could soften even the hardest day. But behind Emily's gentle demeanor lay the weight of choices made long ago. Michael thought of Emily often, though he never admitted it aloud. Sometimes he imagined what might have been if things had unfolded differently. Other times he convinced himself it was better this way. Still, memories of her persisted, surfacing in quiet moments when the city slowed and the silence of his penthouse became unbearable. That evening, Michael sat alone in his study, staring at a faded photograph of Emily he kept hidden in his desk drawer. Her smile in the picture seemed distant, like something from another lifetime. He traced the edges of the photo, lost in thought. Where was she now? Was she happy? And why, after all these years, did the thought of her still feel so close? Michael hadn't expected the evening to be anything more than another networking event. The ballroom was filled with familiar faces, industry leaders exchanging hollow pleasantries over champagne. He navigated the room with ease, offering polite smiles but keeping conversations brief. As he reached for a glass of wine at the bar, his gaze drifted across the crowd. And there she was, Emily. Time seemed to stop. She was standing near the entrance, her hair a little shorter, her posture a little more guarded, but unmistakably Emily. Michael's heart raced, but it wasn't just her presence that froze him. Beside her stood a little girl, no older than 4, clutching Emily's hand. The girl's dark hair curled slightly at the ends, and her eyes, bright and curious, held a familiar spark. Michael's breath caught. He stepped forward without thinking, weaving through the crowd until he was just a few feet away. Emily turned, her eyes locking onto his in an instant that felt heavier than the room around them. "Emily," he said softly, unsure of what else to say. Her grip on the little girl's hand tightened. "Michael," she replied, her voice steady but distant. The little girl glanced up at Michael with wide eyes, studying him curiously. For a fleeting moment, Michael thought he saw recognition flicker in her expression. "Is she?" Michael began, but the words caught in his throat. "This is Lily," Emily interrupted, her tone making it clear she wouldn't elaborate further. "It's good to see you." Michael nodded, though questions swirled in his mind. Lily shifted behind Emily, peeking at him shyly. Before he could press further, Emily offered a polite but firm smile. "We should go. Take care of yourself, Michael." Hello guys, if you like our stories and haven't subscribed yet, support our work and subscribe to the channel to help us. And just like that, she slipped away into the crowd, leaving Michael standing alone, the weight of unspoken truths settling heavily on his chest. Michael sat in his office the next day, staring blankly at the reports spread across his desk. The numbers and projections blurred together, his mind circling the same thought. Lily. Her eyes. There was no denying the resemblance. But Emily's silence echoed louder than any answer Michael could imagine. For hours, he debated with himself. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe Emily had moved on completely, and Lily was someone else's daughter. After all, 5 years was a long time. Yet the doubt lingered. He picked up his phone, scrolling through his contacts until Emily's name appeared. His thumb hovered over the call button, but he hesitated. What if she didn't answer? Worse, what if she did? Michael tossed the phone aside, leaning back in his chair. It wasn't his place to interfere. Emily had made her choice long ago, and he had respected that, even if it left scars he never fully acknowledged. A knock at the door snapped him from his thoughts. Marcus, his assistant, poked his head in. Sir? The investors are waiting. Michael nodded, standing and straightening his jacket. I'll be right there. As he walked into the meeting room, he forced himself to focus. The presentation flowed smoothly, but his mind was elsewhere. Every time he blinked, Lily's face flashed in his thoughts. After the meeting, Marcus approached cautiously. You seemed distracted. Everything all right? Michael paused, unsure how to explain something he barely understood himself. Just a long night. Marcus gave a small nod and left it at that. Hours later, Michael sat alone in his penthouse, the city lights sprawling beneath him. The same old photograph of Emily lay on the table, right beside his untouched glass of whiskey. He told himself to let it go, but deep down he knew he wouldn't. The following evening, Michael found himself seated across from David Grant, an old friend and one of the few people he trusted. They met at a quiet rooftop bar overlooking the city, far from the noise of their usual circles. David leaned back in his chair, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. You've been quiet tonight. That's not like you. Michael exhaled slowly, weighing his words. I saw Emily. David's eyebrows lifted. Emily? After all this time, Michael nodded, his gaze fixed on the skyline. She wasn't alone. There was a little girl with her, about 4 years old. David caught on immediately. And you think she's yours? I don't know. Michael rubbed the back of his neck, frustration simmering beneath his calm exterior. Emily didn't say much, but I could see it. There's something familiar about her. David studied him for a moment, then set his glass down. Look, Michael, I remember how hard it was when she left. You buried yourself in work and it kept you going. But if there's even a chance that girl is your daughter, you can't ignore it. Michael shook his head. Emily didn't want me involved then. Why would she now? Maybe she was protecting herself. Or maybe she thought you weren't ready, David said carefully. But people change. You've changed. Michael laughed bitterly. Have I? David's expression softened. You have, whether you see it or not. The conversation hung in the air between them, heavy but honest. Michael mulled over David's words, staring down at his untouched drink. She deserves to know her father, Michael, and you deserve to know her. As the evening stretched on, Michael left the bar with a clearer sense of direction. David's words echoed in his mind long after they parted ways. By the time he returned home, one thing was certain. He couldn't let this go. 3 days passed before Michael finally worked up the nerve to act. Emily had been on his mind relentlessly, but it was Lily's face that lingered the most. There were too many unanswered questions, and the weight of them had become impossible to ignore. That afternoon, Michael stepped out of his office early, a rare occurrence that caught Marcus by surprise. Cancel the rest of my meetings, Michael said, already heading for the elevator. Should I reschedule for tomorrow? Marcus called after him. Michael didn't answer. He drove across town, memories tugging at him with every mile. The neighborhood felt smaller than he remembered, but nothing had changed. As he pulled up in front of Emily's apartment building, Michael hesitated, his hand resting on the steering wheel. Was this the right move? Before he could turn back, the front door of the building opened. Emily stepped outside, holding Lily's hand as they made their way down the steps. Michael's heart pounded. He got out of the car, and by the time Emily noticed him, he was already halfway across the sidewalk. Michael, she said, surprise flickering across her face. Lily looked up at him curiously, tilting her head the same way Emily used to when she was deep in thought. Hi, he said, his voice softer than he intended. He glanced at Lily. I was hoping we could talk. Emily's expression tightened. She glanced around, as if unsure of what to say in front of Lily. Now's not a good time, she replied quietly, her eyes wary. Michael crouched slightly to Lily's height, offering a small smile. Hi there. I'm Michael. What's your name? Lily glanced at Emily, as if waiting for approval. Emily nodded reluctantly. Lily, the little girl said shyly. It's nice to meet you, Lily, Michael replied, his heart aching at how natural the words felt. Emily shifted uncomfortably. Michael, I know this is sudden, he interrupted, standing again. But I've been thinking about that night, and I can't just walk away. Emily's eyes softened for a fleeting moment but hardened just as quickly. Michael, I appreciate that, but this isn't simple. I'm not asking for simple, he said gently. I just want to talk. Please. Emily sighed, glancing down at Lily, who had grown restless. After a moment, she nodded. All right, she said. But not here. Michael exhaled, the tension in his chest easing just a little. Thank you. Emily led the way back inside the building, and Michael followed, feeling as though he had just stepped across an invisible line, one that led him into a part of his life he hadn't realized he was missing. Michael stood by the window of the small cafe, his eyes fixed on Emily and Lily as they approached. The late afternoon sun cast a soft glow around them, and for a brief moment, Michael imagined what life might have looked like if things had been different, if he had been there from the start. Emily chose a table near the corner, away from the crowd. Lily sat beside her, swinging her legs beneath the chair while humming quietly. Michael crossed the room and took the seat across from them, unsure of where to begin. Thank you for agreeing to this, he said carefully. His gaze shifted to Lily, who watched him with quiet curiosity. I appreciate it. Emily nodded but kept her guard up. I know you have questions, but I need to make something clear before we start. Michael met her eyes, sensing the weight behind her words. I've raised Lily on my own for a reason, Emily said softly. She doesn't know anything about us, and I don't want her caught in the middle of whatever this is. Michael glanced at Lily, her small hands tracing invisible shapes on the tabletop. I understand. I won't do anything to confuse her. A brief silence followed, filled only by the soft chatter of the cafe around them. Finally, Michael spoke. Is she mine? Emily's expression tightened. She glanced at Lily, who was now preoccupied with a set of sugar packets. Yes, she said quietly. The single word knocked the air from Michael's lungs. He looked at Lily again, this time with the clarity of knowing. She was his daughter. Why didn't you tell me? Michael's voice was calm, but the hurt beneath it was unmistakable. Emily hesitated, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. When I found out you were different, Michael. Everything was about the company, the long hours, the meetings, the late nights. I didn't think you were ready to be part of something like this. Michael's eyes softened. I could have tried, maybe, but I wasn't willing to risk her getting hurt if you couldn't. He nodded slowly, processing her words. As much as he wanted to argue, he couldn't deny the truth in them. Lily tugged gently at Emily's sleeve. Mom, can I get a cookie? Emily smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair behind Lily's ear. Of course, sweetheart. Go ahead. Lily hopped off her chair and skipped toward the counter. Michael watched her go, his heart swelling with emotions he hadn't expected. She deserves to know me, he said softly. Emily's eyes met his, and for the first time that day, the tension between them eased. I know, she replied, but let's take this one step at a time. The days that followed were unlike anything Michael had experienced. He found himself standing at the edge of a world he had never known. A world of playgrounds, bedtime stories, and the quiet magic of parenthood. But it was not without its challenges. Emily agreed to let Michael see Lily once a week, but the meetings were carefully controlled. They met at parks or quiet cafes, and Michael never stayed longer than an hour. It was a fragile arrangement, and Emily's guard never wavered. Lily, on the other hand, was far more open. She quickly grew fond of Michael, peppering him with questions about his job, his car, and whether or not he knew how to build pillow forts. Each time they met, she greeted him with the same bright smile that slowly chipped away at the walls Michael didn't realize he had built around himself. One afternoon, as they sat in the park, Lily tugged at Michael's sleeve. Why don't you come over to our house? She asked innocently, her legs swinging beneath the bench. You can see my room. Emily stiffened beside her, but Michael smiled gently. Maybe someday, he replied. I'd like that. Emily's eyes met his, cautious but softening. As the weeks passed, Michael's bond with Lily grew, but so did the weight of his absence from her life. He began to wonder how different things could have been if he had known sooner, if he had been there for her first steps, her first words. One evening, Michael met David at the same rooftop bar where they had talked weeks earlier. David listened intently as Michael recounted his visits with Lily. "She's incredible," Michael said, a rare smile touching his face. "But I feel like I've missed so much." David nodded thoughtfully. "You can't change the past. But you're here now. That's what matters." Michael took a sip of his drink, his gaze distant. "I just don't know if Emily will ever fully trust me. And I can't blame her for that." David leaned forward. "Then show her that you're serious. Prove to her that you're not going anywhere." Michael's jaw tightened. He knew David was right, but he wasn't sure how to bridge the gap between him and Emily. A week later, Michael's resolve was put to the test. Emily called unexpectedly, her voice strained. "Lily's school has a family day this Saturday," she said. "She asked if you could come." Michael felt his heart leap. "Of course, I'll be there." When Saturday arrived, Michael found himself standing outside Lily's school, clutching a bouquet of flowers. The sight of parents and children scattered across the playground brought a strange sense of unfamiliarity. Emily appeared beside him, her arms crossed. "You didn't have to bring flowers," she said, her tone teasing but light. Michael handed them to her with a smirk. "Old habits." Lily ran toward them, her face lighting up as she spotted Michael. "You came!" she exclaimed, throwing her arms around him. Michael crouched to her level. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." Throughout the day, Michael played every game Lily dragged him into, from sack races to crafts. Emily watched from a distance, and for the first time in years, Michael saw traces of the warmth they once shared. As the sun began to set, Lily tugged at Michael's hand. "Can you come to dinner with us?" Michael glanced at Emily, who hesitated but eventually nodded. "All right," she said softly. It wasn't just a step forward. It felt like the beginning of something Michael hadn't dared to hope for. Dinner at Emily's home was more than Michael expected. Her apartment was small but warm, filled with little touches that reflected her life with Lily. Paintings on the fridge, stuffed animals on the couch, and tiny shoes scattered by the door. It felt lived in, far different from the cold, pristine space Michael returned to every night. Lily talked endlessly through dinner, recounting every detail of family day at school. Michael listened intently, hanging on to every word as if trying to memorize the moments he had missed. Emily stayed quiet for the most part, watching the interaction between them with guarded curiosity. After dinner, Michael found himself sitting on the floor beside Lily, helping her assemble a puzzle. Emily washed dishes nearby, occasionally glancing over her shoulder. "Michael," Lily said suddenly, holding up a puzzle piece, "are you coming to my birthday party next month?" Michael froze for a moment, the question catching him off guard. His eyes flicked to Emily, who wiped her hands dry and stepped closer. "We haven't talked about that yet, Lily," Emily said gently. "But I want him to come," Lily insisted, placing the piece in its spot with determination. Michael smiled softly. "I'd love to, if that's okay with your mom." Emily hesitated. The space between them felt heavier than before, but she eventually nodded. "We'll see." Lily seemed satisfied with that answer and returned to the puzzle, but Michael could feel the tension lingering in the air. Later that evening, as Michael stood by the door preparing to leave, Emily joined him, her arms crossed loosely. "She really likes you," Emily said quietly, her gaze fixed on Lily, who was still absorbed in the puzzle. "I like her too," Michael replied. "I don't want to miss out on any more of her life, Emily. I know I can't make up for the past, but I want to be here now." Emily looked down, her fingers brushing the edge of the door. "I was afraid you'd say that," she admitted softly. Michael frowned. "Why?" "Because it's hard to trust that this isn't temporary," she said, meeting his eyes for the first time that night. "You have a life, a busy one, and I need to know that Lily won't get hurt if things change." Michael stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I'm not going anywhere, Emily. I've made mistakes, but I don't want this to be one of them." For a brief moment, Emily's guard slipped. She looked at Michael not as the man she had kept at arm's length for years, but as someone she once loved. "I guess we'll find out," she said, opening the door. As Michael stepped into the hallway, he glanced back, offering a faint smile. "Thank you for tonight." Emily nodded. "Good night, Michael." And as the door closed, Michael realized that while the path ahead was uncertain, he had taken the first real step into the life he wanted. The following weeks passed in quiet rhythm. Michael's visits became more frequent, and Lily's excitement whenever he arrived grew impossible to ignore. Emily remained cautious but gradually began to lower her walls, allowing Michael deeper into their lives. One Friday evening, Michael arrived early, carrying a small wrapped gift for Lily, a book he thought she might like. Emily opened the door, visibly tired but offering a faint smile. "She's in her room," Emily said, stepping aside to let him in. As Michael walked down the hall, he paused for a moment outside Lily's door. From inside, he could hear her humming softly. He knocked gently. "Come in," Lily's voice chimed. Michael entered to find Lily sitting cross-legged on the floor, her toys scattered around her. She looked up and grinned. "I brought you something," Michael said, handing her the small gift. Lily's eyes lit up as she tore into the wrapping, revealing the book beneath. "Thank you," she said, leaping up to hug him tightly. Michael's heart swelled. Moments like this had become his anchor, grounding him in a way his career never could. Later that evening, as Lily drifted off to sleep, Michael and Emily sat quietly in the living room. The silence between them was comfortable, but Emily's expression shifted as if something weighed heavily on her mind. "She's been asking about you," Emily said softly, breaking the quiet. "More often now." Michael leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Is that a bad thing?" Emily shook her head. "No, but it scares me. She's never had to deal with disappointment before. She hesitated. "I'm afraid of what happens if you leave." Michael's gaze met hers, steady and calm. "I'm not leaving, Emily. I know I wasn't there before, but I'm here now, and I'm staying." Emily held his gaze, searching for any sign of doubt, but all she found was sincerity. "I want to believe that," she whispered. Michael reached across the space between them, his hand lightly brushing against hers. For the first time, Emily didn't pull away. They sat like that for a long moment, neither speaking, but in that silence, something shifted, something deeper than words could express. A week after their quiet conversation, Michael arrived at Emily's apartment for what had become their regular Saturday routine. But this time, something felt different. When Emily opened the door, she wore a soft, almost hesitant smile. "We're going to the park today," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "Lily's been talking about it all morning." Michael grinned. "Sounds perfect." Lily ran from her room, clutching a soccer ball under one arm. "Michael, can you play with me today?" "I wouldn't miss it," Michael said, crouching to her level. The afternoon at the park felt like something out of a life Michael hadn't dared to imagine for himself. He chased Lily across the grass, lifting her into the air as she giggled uncontrollably. Emily watched from a bench, the sunlight catching strands of her hair as she smiled, really smiled, for the first time in years. As Lily ran ahead to climb on the playground, Michael sat beside Emily, catching his breath. "She's amazing," Michael said, watching Lily with admiration. Emily nodded, her eyes softening. "She is." Michael glanced at Emily. "I've missed so much, but I'm grateful you're letting me be part of this now." Emily's fingers brushed against the edge of the bench, as if considering her next words carefully. "I was wrong to keep her from you for so long," she admitted quietly. "I thought I was protecting her. But maybe I was just protecting myself." Michael's hand rested lightly over hers, grounding the moment between them. "I understand. I'm just glad we're here now." For the first time, Emily didn't pull away. She let her hand linger beneath his, the unspoken weight between them lifting, piece by piece. From across the playground, Lily waved excitedly. "Come push me on the swings." Michael smiled. "Be right there." As he stood, he glanced at Emily. She met his gaze with a warmth that hadn't been there before. And in that brief exchange, Michael realized this wasn't just about Lily. This was about rebuilding something he thought was lost forever. The next few weeks settled into a quiet, steady rhythm. Michael's presence in Lily's life became more natural, as if he had always been part of their small family. One evening, as Michael helped Lily pack her school bag, Emily stood in the doorway watching them. The sight filled her with emotions she hadn't let herself feel in years. Hope, but also fear. Later, after Lily was asleep, Emily joined Michael on the balcony. The city lights flickered below, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "She's happy," Emily said softly, breaking the silence. Michael leaned against the railing, gazing at the horizon. "I am too." Emily turned to face him, her arms crossed lightly. "I didn't expect this. Any of it." Michael smiled faintly. "Neither did I." A breeze passed between them, and Emily's guard lowered just enough for her voice to soften. "Lily's birthday is next weekend. She wants you there." Michael's eyes met hers, steady and warm. "I wouldn't miss it." Emily hesitated, as if weighing the risks of the words she was about to say. "Maybe you could stay for dinner afterward. Just the three of us." Michael's heart lifted. He reached for her hand, gently intertwining his fingers with hers. "I'd like that," he said quietly. For the first time, the path ahead didn't feel uncertain. Felt like home. Lily's birthday had arrived, and with it came a wave of emotions Michael hadn't anticipated. As he stood in front of Emily's apartment, balancing a gift in one hand and a bouquet of fresh flowers in the other, he hesitated for a moment. This wasn't just another visit. It felt like a threshold, a quiet but significant step toward reclaiming something he thought had slipped away forever. Emily opened the door, her eyes softening as she saw him standing there. "You didn't have to bring flowers," she said, though the faint blush on her cheeks suggested she appreciated the gesture. Michael handed her the bouquet with a gentle smile. "I know, but I wanted to." From behind Emily, Lily's excited voice rang out. "Michael!" She came running, arms outstretched, and Michael crouched to scoop her up in a warm hug. "Happy birthday, Lily," he said, laughing as she squeezed him tightly. "I brought you something special." Lily's eyes sparkled as Michael handed her a neatly wrapped box. She tore into the paper with the enthusiasm only a child could have, gasping when she revealed the new art set inside. "I love it," she beamed, holding the box above her head like a trophy. "Thank you." Michael glanced at Emily, who smiled softly from the doorway. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. The apartment was decorated with bright balloons and handmade banners, the kind of personal touch that spoke to how much Emily poured into Lily's life. The scent of freshly baked cake drifted from the kitchen, filling the space with a warmth that felt unmistakably like home. Later that afternoon, the birthday celebration unfolded in a series of small but meaningful moments. Michael found himself seated on the floor, surrounded by Lily and a handful of her closest friends. They played games, sang songs, and laughed until their sides ached. Emily moved around the room gracefully, making sure everything ran smoothly, but every so often, Michael would catch her watching him with quiet curiosity. As the day stretched on and guests began to leave, Lily tugged at Michael's sleeve. "Are you staying for dinner?" she asked, her eyes wide with hope. Michael hesitated, glancing at Emily, silently asking the same question. Emily paused, her gaze softening as she looked between him and Lily. After a moment, she nodded. "I was planning something simple. You're welcome to stay." Lily's face lit up, and Michael felt a surge of gratitude. "I'd love to," he said. Dinner that evening, the three of them sat at the small dining table, the flickering light from the candles casting a soft glow over their faces. Lily talked animatedly about her day, describing each moment in vivid detail. Michael listened intently, savoring every word as if it were a precious memory in the making. Emily watched quietly, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. At one point, Michael caught her looking at him, and for a brief second, the weight of unspoken words hung between them. "She's really happy," Emily said softly, as Lily ran off to her room after dinner to play with her new art set. Michael set down his fork and met her gaze. "I can see that. You've done an amazing job with her, Emily. She's kind, smart, and full of life." Emily's eyes flickered with something between pride and vulnerability. I tried my best, she said. But it wasn't always easy. Michael shifted, leaning forward slightly. I wish I had been there. I know I can't change the past, but I want to be part of her life now. And yours, if you'll let me. Emily looked down at her hands, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of her lips. I believe you, she said quietly. But I think I'm still figuring out what that looks like. Michael reached across the table, gently covering her hand with his. We can figure it out together. I'm not in a rush. Her eyes met his, and for the first time that evening, Michael felt the distance between them shrink. Not just physically, but emotionally. After dinner, Lily eventually fell asleep on the couch, her head resting against a pillow as her small hands clutched one of her new books. Michael sat on the floor beside her, watching as her chest rose and fell in soft, steady breaths. Emily appeared a few moments later, draping a blanket over Lily's sleeping form. She knelt down beside Michael, their shoulders almost touching as they watched Lily sleep. She looks so peaceful, Michael whispered. Emily nodded. She's had a good day. Michael turned to her, his voice soft but filled with emotion. I've had a good day too. Thank you for letting me be part of it. Emily's eyes flicked to his, lingering there. I'm glad you were here. They sat in silence for a while, the closeness between them speaking louder than words ever could. Michael's heart swelled with a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in years. I didn't think we'd ever get to this point, Emily admitted quietly. Michael shifted, his hand brushing lightly against hers. I didn't either, but I'm glad we did. For a moment, Emily hesitated, but then she intertwined her fingers with his, letting her guard slip just a little more. As Michael held her hand, he realized something profound. This wasn't just about reconnecting with Lily. It was about rebuilding the trust and love he had once shared with Emily. And for the first time, he felt like the pieces were finally falling into place. Before Michael left that night standing by the door, Michael turned to Emily one last time. Thank you for tonight. It meant a lot. Emily nodded, her gaze warm. Lily's birthday wouldn't have been the same without you. Michael hesitated, his hand resting on the doorknob. I meant what I said earlier. I'm here. For both of you. Emily smiled softly. I know. As Michael stepped into the hallway, Emily's voice stopped him. Michael, he turned. Dinner. Next weekend. Just the three of us, she asked, her tone hopeful but cautious. Michael's smile was instant and genuine. I'd love that. And as the door closed behind him, Michael felt the undeniable truth settling in his heart. This wasn't just the beginning of something new. It was the return to something worth holding on to. The apartment had settled into a rare kind of stillness. The soft hum of the city outside filtered in through the windows, but inside, the only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. Lily had fallen asleep curled up on the couch, a half-finished book resting beside her. A faint smile lingered on her lips as if she had drifted off in the middle of a happy thought. Michael sat on the opposite end of the couch, his eyes fixed on her peaceful form. Emily appeared from the kitchen with 2 mugs of tea, handing one to Michael before sitting down next to him. She's had a big day, Emily whispered, careful not to disturb Lily. Michael chuckled softly. She ran circles around me at the park. I think I needed a nap more than she did. Emily smiled as she tucked the blanket around Lily's small shoulders. She watched her daughter for a long moment, her hand lingering near Lily's hair. The tenderness in her gaze tugged at Michael's heart. You're an incredible mother, he said, his voice low but sincere. Emily looked over at him, something unreadable flickering behind her eyes. I had to be. It was just the 2 of us for a long time. Michael nodded, setting his mug down on the coffee table. I'm sorry I wasn't there. Emily's gaze softened, but she didn't speak right away. The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that came with understanding. 2 people who had walked separate roads, now finding themselves at a quiet intersection. You're here now, Emily finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael turned to her, his eyes searching hers for any trace of doubt. I mean it, Emily. I'm not going anywhere. I know I've missed years I can't get back, but I want to be part of her life. And yours, if you'll let me. Emily's lips pressed together, and for a fleeting moment, Michael thought she might pull away. But instead, she exhaled slowly and leaned into him, resting her head lightly against his shoulder. I've spent so long convincing myself I didn't need anyone else, she admitted. I was scared to let you in. Michael's hand brushed over hers, his fingers gently intertwining with hers. I understand, and I'm not asking you to rush into anything. I just want to be here however I can. They sat there in quiet intimacy, the weight of old wounds slowly unraveling between them. Lily stirred softly, her eyes fluttering open to find Michael and Emily sitting together. She yawned and stretched her arms wide, blinking the sleep from her eyes. Michael, she said sleepily, rubbing at her eyes with tiny fists. Still here, he replied with a warm smile. Lily sat up, hugging the book she had been reading. I thought you left. Michael shook his head. Not tonight. Lily's eyes brightened, and she slid across the couch to sit between him and Emily. She nestled against Emily's side but reached out to take Michael's hand, her fingers small in his. Emily glanced at Michael, a look of quiet surprise in her expression. Michael simply smiled, squeezing Lily's hand gently. Can you stay for breakfast tomorrow? Lily asked, her eyes hopeful. Michael glanced at Emily, silently asking the same question. Emily hesitated, but only for a second. I think we can arrange that, she said softly. Lily grinned and leaned against Michael, resting her head against his arm. Good. I like when you're here. Michael's heart swelled at her words, and for the first time in years, he felt a sense of belonging that his career had never given him. The smell of pancakes drifted through the apartment as Michael stood in the kitchen, flipping them with more focus than any boardroom meeting required. Lily sat on the counter beside him, swinging her legs as she watched intently. You're not very good at this, Lily teased, giggling as one of the pancakes landed a little off-center on the plate. Michael laughed. I never said I was a chef, but I'm learning. Emily appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with a soft smile. She watched the two of them for a while before stepping forward to help. Let me, she said, gently taking the spatula from Michael's hand. Their fingers brushed, lingering a second longer than necessary. Michael stepped aside, letting Emily take over. Lily whispered to him conspiratorially, Mom's pancakes are way better. I believe you, Michael whispered back, and Emily rolled her eyes, overhearing them. The three of them sat down for breakfast, the morning light pouring in through the windows, casting the apartment in a warm glow. Felt simple, but to Michael it was everything. As Michael prepared to leave, Lily clung to his side. When are you coming back? Michael crouched to her level, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Soon. Promise. Emily watched the exchange, and when Michael stood, she walked him to the door. Thank you for staying, she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Lily hasn't been this happy in a long time. Michael hesitated at the door, his hand resting lightly on the handle. I haven't been this happy in a long time either. Emily's eyes softened. Maybe we could do this more often. Michael smiled, his heart lifting. I'd like that. She stepped closer, and for a brief moment, the space between them disappeared. Michael kissed her forehead gently, lingering there as Emily closed her eyes. When he pulled away, Emily met his gaze with a quiet vulnerability that hadn't been there before. I'll see you soon, Michael said softly. See you soon, Emily echoed. And as he walked down the hall, Michael knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something new, something worth holding on to. Hello guys, if you like our stories and haven't subscribed yet, support our work and subscribe to the channel to help us.